Support WrestleTalk!
Give us a subscribe.
Hello and welcome to the WrestleTalk News Extra. I am Luke Owen. This is housemate Simon Longden, and we're going to go through AEW getting beaten by NXT once again in the ratings war. We're also going to talk about Tommaso Ciampa refusing the main roster spot. Refusing. Spoiler for that top star. We've also got a couple of other bits as well about Mauro Ranallo returning to NXT, AEW signing another female talent for their women's division, and Charlotte, Flair and Andrade filing some trademarks. But let's kick things off talking about Tommaso Ciampa. So early this year, Tommaso Ciampa was called up to the main roster. Briefly. I think a few people have forgotten about this because it was, a hashtag 2-week push thing. But him and Gargano, along with Aleister Black and Ricochet, were called up to the main roster, and then Ciampa effectively got injured. And so plans had to change. They moved Gargano and Ciampa back to NXT. And so Gargano's remained there since then, and Ciampa came back and he's also returned to NXT, while Black and Ricochet remained on the main roster to do stuff.
They're there.
Yeah, Black in particular is often just there. Yeah, absolutely. But Tommaso Ciampa was on Lillian Garcia's Chasing Glory podcast very recently, talking about whether he would go back to the main roster. And a very interesting take on this, which is that he had a very, very bad injury, which caused him to go back down to NXT and give up his title, and that to put a real stop to that Ciampa-Gargano storyline. And he's only got a few more bumps on his bump card left to take, and he'd rather do them in NXT.
I think this makes perfect sense. I think, one, it's a rare, interesting thing someone said on a WWE sanctioned podcast, but that's a different thing.
I'm not sure this one is WWE sanctioned.
Oh, is that just her doing a thing?
I think it's just her doing a thing, but they're allowed to have WWE stars on.
Okay, fair enough. I think this is really refreshing to hear any athlete talk about actually managing their injuries, managing bodies, and not just ploughing through and ending up in a wheelchair. If he did do that, he'd be retired in 6 months, and then he'd like a coaching role.
Yeah.
And I thought that's interesting because I think they are clearly grooming anyway, and I'd probably say Cassius Ohno as well, have already clearly been given these sort of handshake deals that they are going to be the next crop of trainers, not just the NXT roster, but also producers on the main roster. They are clearly ready to have. They're in this transitional phase now. Scotty Too Hotty can't teach everyone.
Well, this is the deal they gave to Joey Ryan. Joey Ryan was going to come in, be an NXT star for a couple of years, and then move into a producing role or a trainer role, and that's the deal they offered to him. But effectively said, well, I can earn more money on the independent scene, and I'd much rather do that. So the quote that he was talking about for Lillian Garcia was comparing the main roster schedule to the NXT schedule. And what he said is that I could do 4 more years of that in the time, talking about the NXT schedule, that I could do in 1 year of the Raw and SmackDown. So how long can my career and portfolio grow here as opposed to growing there? Now, it's become a thing where I've legitimately vocalized to them, if I go to Raw or SmackDown, then I'm going to retire and would love to produce or coach or be part of it. There's no way I can take on that load and going, yeah, you know what, I'll just have a 6-month run and then call it quits. I just won't do that. It's just not worth it to me.
I think it's really smart, him being open about that coaching, producing stuff, is more suggesting that that's a legitimate conversation to have and not just something he's suggesting. I do think he's one of the guys who they all respect and has brought so many fresh ideas and so much of his own experience into that role, and then managed to merge that with a WWE star. I think he is sort of the perfect guy to be the locker room guy, the coach going forward. The one, the Albert role. The guy they all know and is their sort of their guy on the inside kind of thing. I think I hope that is what happens for him.
He's a perfect fit for that NXT producer trainer role, and essentially, just training up the next crop of create the next Tommaso Ciampa down in NXT.
And let's not forget, he also has still got a lot to offer in the ring. So next up, Pro Wrestling Sheet have been reporting the return of Maranello.
I wonder how Pro Wrestling Sheet got that scoop.
Amazing insight on that. He's obviously been out since the Corey Graves stuff happened, or did it happen? Depending who you ask.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't happen, and then it must have happened because Graves apologised for that awful stuff he said.
It 100% definitely did happen,
Yeah.
but Graves was just like on the offensive, being like, no, Dave Meltzer, you're making up all these stories. And then went, oh, actually, no, he didn't make up. Well, actually, no, he didn't say that at all. He just said, I'm sorry, but at no point did he ever say, yeah, Dave Meltzer didn't make up that report at all.
Exactly. So, Maranello, according to someone from Pro Wrestling Sheet, is going to come out this week to NXT.
Yeah.
I imagine to absolutely zero fanfare.
Well, Ranallo, are you being sarcastic?
No, as in he'll get fanfare. I think in the broadcast they are going to cruise right past it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like at Survivor Series when he wasn't there, because he was booked to be at Survivor Series, Michael Cole was like, he was so passionate at War Games, he blew out his voice box. Absolute bollocks.
Yeah.
That's not the case at all. Corey Graves' tweet really, really affected him mentally, and he had to go home. And it's not a case of, like, it's Meltzer's word against Graves, even though Graves has apologized for it. Frank Shamrock, who is, Ranallo's manager and best friend, has been on the record being like, no, Graves' tweet really, really affected him, and you should apologize for what you did. It took Graves, like a week or so to do it. But he has apologized now, and he said on After the Bell, I would never intentionally cause anyone undue stress, especially a co-worker, so I apologize. But Ryan Satin is saying that Mauro has told WWE he's going to be back this coming Wednesday.
I do think sometimes he forgets he's not talent.
Yeah.
He's in a different part of the company. And so when he just dumps on someone else from the company, it's not seen as kayfabe banter or an angle. It's just seen as you being a bit of a dick to someone you share sandwiches with. Like,
yeah, the old I did it to start an angle. It's like, why now? Like, why wait till like the day before Survivor Series to start an angle with someone that's not had any build on television?
Yeah, and also, but let's not forget, Maranello is very well respected in boxing and in MMA. Literally, Frank Shamrock is his manager and best friend. He doesn't get this stuff from that side of the world. It's just such a shame that he gets this only really from WWE.
And it's always main roster as well.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of NXT, it was another good week for them in the ratings this week, sort of. We'll go into a bit more detail on this, but it is like headline news, a good week for NXT, because they did beat AEW in the ratings. NXT drew 810,000 viewers, while AEW drew its lowest rated episode thus far, 663,000, which is about 230,000 down from the previous week.
I think one thing we're learning, huge portions of the wrestling media didn't become experts on ratings and how they work and what they mean. I think this obsession with the demo, because when you go into the numbers, everyone's saying, and this is from Meltzer's reporting as well, that essentially the overall is lower for AEW, but they won the key demos.
Exactly.
18 to 49 is what they're saying. Now, in the UK, for example, that key demo is crushed into a much smaller bracket of sort of 18 to 35.
Yeah.
18 to 49 is a lot of people.
It is a lot of people.
And I think there is also baked into this the idea that AEW inherently skews younger. I'm not sure how much I buy into it. First of all, the numbers haven't brought that out yet.
Well, I'd say the numbers have brought that out. The key demos are showing that.
I just don't think there is this huge swathe of 20-somethings who somehow remember WCW before
which is
they
highly
were born.
unlikely. Yeah, highly unlikely.
And that's what they return to. I think that's what I mean. I think there's this baked-in wisdom that the lapsed fan is a lot younger than I think the lapsed fan actually is, and those lapsed fans, I would say, probably are skewing older and hitting NXT. And actually, what AEW probably should be concentrating on is perhaps discovering that these younger people that they're catching are actually new fans.
I thought David Bixenspan had a really interesting take on this, which he wrote for Forbes, where he said the low number and narrowed gap can probably be chalked up to it being Thanksgiving Eve, especially with Dynamite being the younger skewed show every week so far, but we'll have a better idea of that on Thursday afternoon when the ratings for this week's Wednesday night show come in. I think this week's going to be a very interesting show because AEW didn't sit back last week. They put a championship match on there along with Pac versus Omega. So they weren't like half-arsing that show. They were putting out a show that they wanted people to watch.
Ultimately, NXT has the backing of the biggest one, and they should be in their minds wiping the floor with AEW every week.
Yeah.
So the fact that this has even been this close should still be, even though it's a down week for AEW, should still be seen as like they are still well within the same market range as someone who has gotten more support than any,
you would have thought that 2.1 million viewers from Raw would be tuning in for NXT if they wanted
some
more.
Some of them are gonna. You have to assume.
You'd imagine that some of them would. So I think this week's numbers are going to be a really telling story as to whether or not this whole Survivor Series experiment worked for NXT beating AEW on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And just on AEW, Fightful reported over the weekend that they have signed Big Swole to their women's division, and then during an interview at WrestleCade over that same weekend, Swole confirmed this news. She's been a lot on AEW Dark in tag matches, which she's lost. She was also in the Casino Battle Royale at All Out. So it's clearly someone that AEW really likes, but like Chris Statlander, who was a lot featured on AEW Dark and then was on Dynamite last week, and it's going to be again on this week against Shida. So, yeah, maybe they've got some big plans for Big Swole.
So, Wrestling Inc. are reporting that Charlotte Flair and Andrade have, as everyone is doing now, signing patent for their names, their indie names, or her real name.
Yeah, so it's a combination of her real name and her stage name, because it's not like Ashley Flair.
Flair.
It's Ashley Flair, the wrestling way of spelling Flair.
Yes. Andrade has got his old indie name.
Yes, La Sombra.
Yes. In the current climate where, everyone can be a brand and can have their own expansive repertoire stuff they do outside of WWE. They are, of course, independent contractors. I think this is much more about security, protecting their legacy as well. This means, Charlotte Flair getting that means that she can go off and essentially have a transitional period between being a wrestler, her real self, and still a Flair, without having to constantly ask permission for WWE to go and do a talk somewhere.
My guess on this is reality TV show. I wonder if they're trademarking these sorts of names, if they're going to go off and do like Ms. and Mrs., like Total Divas, or if they're going to launch a podcast together and they want to have some trademarks that they own. So it's not a WWE branded thing, but they can go off and make their own deals.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I wonder if it's a case of that. And obviously then from the back of that, you can launch your own merchandise with Queen of Wrestling. So yes, you can file the trademarks for the Queen of Wrestling and Ashley Flair, while Andrade trademark El Idolo and La Sombra. So yeah, I wonder if they're going to go with something along those lines. Well, that is all we've got time for on this edition of the WrestleTalk News Extra. Let us know in the comments if you did enjoy this version of the WrestleTalk News. We might do more of them. We enjoyed doing it yesterday. We've got great feedback.
Maybe some sort of extra klaxon.
Yeah. News Extra. So let us know what sound effects we should also use. And let us know what you thought of today's news stories. But for now, click the videos that appeared on the desk to catch up with more WrestleTalk awesome things. I've been Luke Owen. This has been Housemate Simon Longden, and that we're wrestling.